The whiskey-soaked gambler threw his cards down with a triumphant laugh and declared what everyone in Bentonville, Arkansas already knew. "That girl's got no prospects and no future, mark my words," as Tessa Whitmore walked past the saloon carrying her dead mother's only good dress wrapped in brown paper. It was the spring of 1877, and Tessa had just turned 22 years old without a celebration, without cake, without anyone who cared enough to remember. Her mother had died 3 months prior from consumption, leaving Tessa alone in a world that had no patience for single women without family or fortune. The boarding house where they had rented a cramped room for the past 5 years had given her 2 weeks to settle her mother's debts or find herself on the street. Those 2 weeks had come and gone like autumn leaves in a strong wind. She clutched the package tighter to her chest as she walked down the dusty main street. The dress inside would fetch maybe $3 at the general store if Mr. Henderson was feeling charitable. It would not be enough. Nothing was ever enough. The $73 her mother owed for back rent, medicine, and the doctor's useless visits might as well have been $7,000 for all the chance Tessa had of paying it. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Caldwell's sharp voice cut through the afternoon air. The boarding house owner stood on her porch, arms crossed over her ample bosom, her face pinched like she had been sucking on lemons. "I trust you have my money?" Tessa stopped, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of red dust. "I'm working on it, Mrs. Caldwell. I just need a few more days." "You have had months of days, girl. I'm running a business, not a charity house for orphans. If you cannot pay by tomorrow morning, your belongings will be on the street, and I will rent that room to someone who can afford it." The words struck like physical blows, but Tessa kept her spine straight and her chin up. She had learned early that showing weakness only made people meaner. "Yes, madam, tomorrow morning." Mrs. Caldwell sniffed and went back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Tessa stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of impossible circumstances pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow morning. She had no idea where she would go or what she would do. She had already tried to find work at every respectable establishment in Bentonville. No one wanted to hire a woman with no skills beyond reading and basic arithmetic. The only job offers she had received were the kind that made her stomach turn, from men who looked at her like she was meat at the butcher shop. She continued toward Henderson's general store, her mind racing through increasingly desperate plans. She could try to leave town, but where would she go? How would she get there? She had no horse, no wagon, barely enough money for a single meal. The dress money would buy her maybe 2 days of food if she was careful. The bell above the door jangled as she entered the store. Mr. Henderson looked up from his ledger, his expression shifting from neutral to pitying when he saw her. That look made her want to scream. She was so tired of pity that led nowhere, of sympathetic words that changed nothing. "Miss Whitmore, what can I do for you today?" She set the package on the counter carefully. "I need to sell this dress. It was my mother's best one. Good fabric, barely worn." He unwrapped it slowly, examining the blue cotton with its careful stitching and modest lace collar. Her mother had made it herself, pouring hours into every seam, dreaming of wearing it to church socials and community gatherings that never quite materialized. Tessa watched his weathered hands assess its worth and felt like she was selling a piece of her mother's soul. "I can give you $2, he said finally. "It's worth at least $4. Maybe in a big city. Here in Bentonville, I am lucky if I can sell it for $3. I need to make something too." His tone was not unkind, but it was firm. Tessa closed her eyes briefly. "Fine. $2. He counted out the coins and she tucked them into her pocket, feeling the small weight of them. $2.37. That was everything she had in the world. Tomorrow she would be homeless with less than $3 to her name. She was turning to leave when the door opened behind her, bringing with it the smell of pine trees and wood smoke, and something wild she could not quite name. The man who entered had to duck his head to clear the doorframe, and when he straightened to his full height, Tessa found herself staring up at the largest human being she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the afternoon sun streaming through the door. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back loosely with a strip of leather. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, weathered by sun and wind, with a thick beard covering his jaw. But it was his arms that caught her attention, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his worn flannel shirt. The muscles there looked like they had been carved from granite, corded and powerful. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "Preston," Mr. Henderson said, his voice warming considerably. "Good to see you down from the mountain. What brings you to town?" The man's voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "Need supplies. Winter took more than I planned." Preston. The name clicked in Tessa's memory. She had heard whispers about Preston Northwood, the mountain man who lived somewhere in the Ozark Hills north of town. People spoke of him with a mixture of respect and wariness. They said he could track anything on 2 legs or 4, that he lived alone in a cabin he had built with his own hands, that he came to town maybe 3 or 4 times a year and never stayed long. They said he had fought in the war, though which side and what he had seen, no one seemed to know. His eyes swept the store and landed on her for just a moment. They were gray, like storm clouds, and sharp with intelligence. Tessa felt pinned by that gaze, like a butterfly on a board. Then his attention moved on, and she could breathe again. "I will get your order together," Mr. Henderson was saying. "The usual, plus extra flour and coffee, and ammunition, rifle and pistol both." Tessa slipped past him toward the door, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly enough that both men heard it. Heat flooded her cheeks as she quickened her pace, desperate to escape. "Wait!" The mountain man's voice stopped her at the door. She turned reluctantly, expecting mockery or pity. Instead, he was looking at her with an expression she could not read. "You are hungry." It was not a question. Tessa lifted her chin. "I'm fine, thank you." "You're a terrible liar." He turned to Mr. Henderson. "Add a food basket to my order. Bread, cheese, dried meat, whatever else makes sense." "I don't need your charity," Tessa said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. But she was so tired of being the object of people's pity, of being treated like a problem to be solved or ignored. Those gray eyes fixed on her again. "Did not figure you for the kind to let pride make you stupid." The words were blunt enough to shock her. Mr. Henderson made a small noise of surprise, but Preston Northwood kept his gaze steady on her face. "You are hungry," he repeated. "I have more than I need. That is not charity. That is common sense." Tessa wanted to argue, wanted to throw his offer back in his face and storm out with her dignity intact. But her traitorous stomach growled again, and she thought about the long night ahead with nothing but stale bread and worry for company. "Thank you," she finally said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. He nodded once and turned back to his business. Tessa stood there awkwardly, unsure if she was supposed to wait or leave. Mr. Henderson began pulling items from the shelves, piling them on the counter. It was an impressive amount of supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, beans, ammunition boxes, new rope, a tin of kerosene. "You planning to hole up for another year?" Henderson asked. "Maybe." Preston's tone did not invite further questions. While Henderson tallied the order, Preston's attention drifted back to Tessa. "You are the Whitmore girl." Tessa Whitmore. "Your mother died recently." 3 months ago. She did not ask how he knew. In a town the size of Bentonville, everyone knew everyone else's business. "Sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but something in his tone made them sound genuine rather than perfunctory. Tessa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Henderson finished the tally and whistled low. "That comes to $43 even, Preston." The mountain man counted out bills from a worn leather pouch, adding them to the pile on the counter. Tessa tried not to stare at the money, but it was difficult. That was more cash than she had seen in months. Where did a man living alone in the mountains get that kind of money? As if reading her thoughts, Henderson said, "Those furs you brought last fall fetched good prices. The buyer from St. Louis was particularly impressed with the beaver pelts." So that was it. He was a trapper. It made sense given where he lived and how he looked. Preston gathered his supplies with efficient movements, loading them into a large pack that looked like it already weighed more than Tessa could lift. The food basket Henderson had prepared, he held out to her. "Here," she took it carefully, feeling the weight of bread and cheese and other items wrapped in cloth. "I will pay you back." "No need." "I insist." He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing past her determined expression to the desperation underneath. "If it matters to you that much, you can pay it back in work." "What kind of work?" She heard the suspicion in her own voice and did not try to hide it. She had heard enough offers of work from men to be wary. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. The kind that involves cooking and cleaning. My cabin could use a woman's touch, and I am tired of my own cooking. You stay for a month, keep house, and we will call the debt settled. Tessa's mind reeled. It was not the offer she had expected, and she did not know how to respond. Go into the mountains with a stranger? Live in his cabin? It sounded insane. It also sounded like the only option she had. Miss Whitmore is a respectable young woman, Henderson interjected carefully. I am not sure her reputation could survive such an arrangement. Preston turned that flat gray gaze on the shopkeeper. Her reputation will not survive sleeping in the street either, will it? And I am guessing that is where she is headed, given the way she looks and the fact that she is selling her dead mother's clothes. The brutal honesty of it made Tessa flinch, but he was not wrong. It is not proper, Henderson insisted, though his conviction seemed to be wavering. Proper will not keep her fed and sheltered. Preston looked back at Tessa. Your choice. Come work for a month or take your chances here. Either way, the food is yours. She thought about Mrs. Caldwell's ultimatum, about the $73 she would never have, about the streets and the kind of men who lurked there looking for desperate women. She thought about her mother's dreams for her, the respectable life they had both wanted. But dreams did not keep you alive. Practical choices did. 1 month, she said, and then you bring me back to town. Agreed. And I want it understood that this is a working arrangement. Nothing more. His expression did not change. Would not want it any other way. Something about the flat certainty in his voice made her believe him. Tessa took a deep breath. Then I accept. Good. We leave at dawn tomorrow. Meet me at the north edge of town where the main road becomes a trail. Bring whatever you need to bring, but pack light. It is a full day's walk to my cabin. I can walk. Never said you could not. He hefted his enormous pack onto his shoulders with an ease that defied the weight she knew it must have. Dawn. Do not be late. He left as abruptly as he had arrived, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the afternoon sunlight. Tessa stood holding the food basket, her mind spinning with the decision she had just made. I hope you know what you are doing, Henderson said quietly. So do I, Tessa admitted. What do you know about him? Really know, I mean. The shopkeeper considered the question carefully. He is honest in his dealings, never known him to cheat or lie. He keeps to himself, but he is not mean-spirited. Helped pull the Miller boy out of the river 2 summers back when the kid fell in during spring flooding. Did not wait around for thanks, just made sure the boy was breathing and left. But he is a hard man who has lived a hard life. The war did something to him, though he does not talk about it. He does not have much patience for foolishness, and he does not need people. Not sure how you will fare up there with just him for company. Tessa gripped the basket handle tighter. I guess I will find out. She spent that evening packing her meager belongings into an old carpet bag her mother had owned. It did not take long. 2 dresses besides the one she was wearing, a nightgown, her mother's Bible, a few pieces of costume jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother, a hairbrush, and a small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world fit easily into one worn bag. Mrs. Caldwell watched from the doorway as Tessa carried her bag down the stairs the next morning before dawn. Running off, are we? I found work. Out of town. I will not be needing the room anymore. You still owe me money. Send the bill to Preston Northwood. I am working for him now, and he will settle my debts. The lie came easily, born of desperation and spite. Let Mrs. Caldwell try to collect from a mountain man who lived a day's walk away. Tessa knew she would never bother. The older woman's eyes widened. Preston Northwood, you're going up to his cabin? I am. Girl, that's foolish. You do not know what kind of man he is, alone up there in the wilderness. Tessa shouldered her bag. I know exactly what kind of people are here in town. I will take my chances with him. She left before Mrs. Caldwell could respond, stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from someone's yard. The town was quiet, most people still asleep in their beds. Tessa walked through the familiar streets one last time, wondering if she would ever see them again, wondering if she wanted to. Preston Northwood was waiting where he said he would be, a dark silhouette against the lightening sky. He had his pack on his back and a rifle slung over one shoulder. When he saw her, he nodded once. "You came." "I said I would." He looked at her dress, the same worn calico she had been wearing yesterday. "That is all you are bringing?" She held up the carpet bag. "Everything I own." Something flickered in his expression, gone too fast to read. "The walk will be hard. If you need to rest, say so. No shame in being honest about your limits." "I can keep up." "We will see." He started walking, and Tessa followed, leaving Bentonville behind as the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The main road quickly narrowed to a trail that wound north into the hills. The Ozark Mountains were not tall like the Rockies she had seen in pictures, but they were rugged and heavily forested, full of hidden hollows and rushing streams. Preston set a steady pace, not fast but relentless. Tessa struggled to match his long strides with her shorter legs. The carpetbag grew heavier with each mile, and her feet began to ache in her worn boots. But she gritted her teeth and kept walking, determined not to show weakness. They walked for hours without speaking. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool and replacing it with humid warmth. Sweat dampened Tessa's dress and made her hair stick to her neck. Her breathing grew labored, and still Preston did not slow or look back. She began to wonder if he had forgotten she was there. Finally, when the sun was nearly overhead, he stopped beside a clear stream that bubbled over smooth rocks. "Rest here. Drink and eat something." Tessa sank onto a fallen log gratefully, every muscle in her legs trembling. Preston knelt by the stream and cupped water to his mouth with his hands, drinking deeply. Tessa did the same, the cold water shocking and wonderful against her parched throat. He pulled bread and cheese from his pack and handed her a portion without comment. They ate in silence, and Tessa found herself studying him covertly. Up close, she could see scars on his hands and forearms, the marks of a life lived rough. His clothes were worn but clean and well-maintained. Everything about him spoke of self-sufficiency and competence. "How much farther?" she finally asked. 4, maybe 5 hours if we keep this pace." Her heart sank. She was already exhausted, and they were not even halfway there. Preston must have seen something in her face because his expression softened fractionally. "It gets easier once you are used to it. Mountain life is hard at first, but you adjust." "Have you always lived up here?" "No. Came back after the war. Could not stomach towns anymore. Too many people, too much noise." He did not elaborate, and Tessa did not push. "Were you born in Arkansas?" "Missouri. Came here when I was 16, before the war. Learned trapping from an old mountain man named Samuel Cord. He died while I was away fighting, left me his cabin in his territory." "That is where we are going? His cabin?" "I rebuilt it, made it bigger, sturdier. It is mine now." The possessive pride in his voice made her curious about what kind of home he had built, but she was too tired to ask more questions. They rested for half an hour before Preston stood and shouldered his pack again. "Time to move." The afternoon was even harder than the morning. The trail grew steeper, winding up and down ridges through dense forest. Tessa's legs felt like lead weights, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The carpetbag handle bit into her palm despite her attempts to shift it from hand to hand. Several times she stumbled over roots or rocks, barely catching herself. Preston finally stopped and turned back to her. Without a word, he took the carpetbag from her hand and secured it to his already massive pack. The additional weight did not seem to affect him at all. "I can carry my own things," Tessa protested weakly. "You can barely carry yourself right now. Save your pride for something that matters." It was too true to argue with. They continued on, and Tessa found the going slightly easier without the bag dragging at her arm. But the hours still stretched endlessly, and she began to wonder if they would walk forever through these endless green hills. Then, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Preston stopped on a ridge and pointed ahead. "There." Tessa followed his gesture and saw, nestled in a small valley between 3 forested hills, a cabin that looked like it had grown from the earth itself. It was built of thick logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch running along the front. Beside it stood a sturdy shed, and beyond that she could see a small cleared area that might have been a garden. A stream sparkled in the afternoon light, running close to the cabin before disappearing into the trees. "That is beautiful," she said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Preston's expression shifted, something like pleasure crossing his harsh features. It will do. They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer, Tessa could see the care that had gone into the cabin's construction. The logs were carefully fitted, the roof was tight, and the windows had real glass panes rather than oiled paper. A split-rail fence enclosed what she'd correctly identified as a garden plot, though nothing was growing in it yet. Preston unlocked the heavy door and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter first. Tessa stepped inside and found herself in a single large room that served as kitchen, living area, and dining space. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hung neatly beside it. A sturdy table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Shelves lined the walls, holding dishes, food supplies, and various tools and equipment. Everything was orderly and clean, surprising her. "There is a loft where I sleep," Preston said, pointing to a ladder leading to a space above. "You can have down here. I will rig a curtain for privacy." Tessa looked around, trying to imagine this as her home for the next month. It was rustic but solid, the kind of place that would be cozy in winter and cool in summer. Through the back window, she could see the stream and the forest beyond. The isolation was absolute. There were no other cabins in sight, no smoke from distant chimneys, no signs of human habitation beyond this one structure. "It is very remote," she said carefully. "That is the point." He dropped his pack and began unpacking supplies. "The privy is out back past the garden. Stream water is clean and cold year-round. There's a root cellar under the trap door there for storing food. Firewood is stacked on the north side of the cabin, but you will need to bring it in as needed." He continued explaining the layout and routines with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he had shown on the trail. Tessa listened, trying to absorb all the information. It was overwhelming, but she was determined not to show it. "Questions?" he asked finally. "Where do I sleep?" He gestured to a corner of the room she had not paid much attention to. A simple wooden frame held a mattress stuffed with what looked like corn husks and topped with several thick quilts. It was not fancy, but it looked comfortable. That was Samuel's bed. I moved up to the loft after he died, but I kept the bed frame. The mattress is new, made it last winter when I had time. "Thank you." She set her carpet bag beside the bed, feeling strange and displaced. This was her home now, at least temporarily. This cabin in the wilderness with a man she did not know. Preston moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. "It will be dark soon. I will make dinner tonight, show you how I do things. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep." Tessa watched as he prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread cooked in a Dutch oven over the fire. He moved with easy confidence, clearly accustomed to taking care of himself. When the food was ready, he dished out 2 portions, and they sat at the table to eat. The meal was plain, but good, better than anything Tessa had eaten in weeks. She was so hungry that she cleaned her plate quickly, trying not to look too eager. Preston noticed and spooned more beans onto her plate without comment. "Eat. You are too thin." It should have been embarrassing, but somehow it was not. Just another fact stated plainly. After dinner, Preston showed her how he preferred dishes to be washed using hot water from the kettle and sand from the stream for scrubbing. He showed her where he kept supplies, how he liked things organized, what needed to be done daily versus weekly. It was a lot of information, but Tessa had always been a quick learner. As darkness fell complete outside the windows, Preston lit 2 oil lamps that cast warm golden light through the cabin. He rigged a rope across one corner and hung a heavy blanket over it, creating a private space around her bed. "That will do for now," he said. "I will make something better later." "It's fine, thank you." He climbed the ladder to the loft without further conversation, and Tessa heard him moving around up there, the soft sounds of a man preparing for sleep. She changed into her nightgown behind the blanket curtain, feeling strange and vulnerable. She was alone in a wilderness cabin with a man she did not know, miles from anyone who could help if things went wrong. But as she lay down on the surprisingly comfortable bed and pulled the quilts up, she realized she felt safer than she had in months. Preston Northwood might be gruff and hard, but he had not looked at her with hunger or meanness. He had not touched her or made inappropriate comments. He had treated her like a person rather than a problem or an opportunity. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice came from the loft, startling her. "Yes?" The rifle by the door's loaded. If anything comes around at night, animal or otherwise, you wake me. Understood? Understood. Good night. Good night. Tessa lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night. Somewhere an owl hooted. The stream bubbled and chuckled over its rocks. Wind whispered through the trees. It was so different from town, from the sounds of wagons and voices and dogs barking, but it was not frightening. It was peaceful. She fell asleep wondering what the morning would bring. The next week settled into a rhythm that surprised Tessa with its comfort. She woke each morning to find Preston already up, often returning from checking his trap lines. She would start the fire and prepare breakfast, simple fare of eggs from the chickens she had discovered living in the shed, bacon, and bread. Preston would eat quickly and head out for the day, leaving her with a list of tasks. At first, the work was overwhelming. The cabin needed deep cleaning that revealed how long Preston had been living alone. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust from the quilts and curtains. She learned to tend the chickens, to draw water from the stream, to manage the fire so it burned steady and hot for cooking, but did not waste wood. Preston was gone most days, checking his traps, hunting, or working on some project in the forest. But he always returned before dark, bringing meat for dinner or fish from the stream. In the evenings, they would eat together, and he would show her things she needed to know: how to properly cure bacon, how to tell if berries were safe to eat, how to identify animal tracks in the mud by the stream. He was not talkative, but he was patient in his teaching. When she made mistakes, like burning the cornbread or forgetting to close the chicken coop properly, he would simply show her the correct way without criticism or anger. It was so different from the constant judgment she had faced in town that it took Tessa time to adjust. She also began to see past his intimidating exterior to the man underneath. Preston Northwood was rough and hard, yes, but he was also fair and surprisingly gentle in his own way. She watched him splint the leg of a rabbit that had been caught in a trap, his huge, scarred hands working with careful precision before releasing the animal back into the wild. "Why save it if you were just going to let it go?" she asked. "Trap was set wrong, caught its leg instead of killing clean. That is my fault, not the rabbit's. No sense in making it suffer for my mistake." One evening, about 2 weeks into her stay, a storm rolled through the valley with dramatic fury. Thunder shook the cabin and lightning split the sky in jagged white bolts. Rain hammered on the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Tessa sat at the table trying to mend one of Preston's shirts, but she jumped at each thunderclap despite herself. Preston looked down from the loft where he was oiling a piece of leather. "Storms frighten you?" "Not usually, but they sound different out here." Louder, nothing to muffle the sound like buildings do in town. The next crack of thunder was so loud, Tessa dropped her needle. Preston climbed down the ladder and moved to the fireplace, poking up the fire and adding wood. "Come sit by the fire. The warmth helps." She joined him, and they sat together listening to the storm rage outside. After a while, Preston began to talk, his deep voice somehow grounding in the chaos. "When I first came back from the war, storms would send me right back to the battlefields in my head. The sound of thunder was too much like cannon fire. I would hide in the cabin, shaking like a leaf, feeling like a coward." It was the first time he had spoken of the war directly. Tessa held very still, afraid any movement might make him stop. "Samuel, the man who owned this cabin before me, he let me be. Did not try to tell me it would be fine or that I needed to get over it, just sat with me when it was bad and waited for it to pass. Eventually, the storms became just storms again. What made the difference? Time, safety, realizing I was allowed to heal." He looked at her then, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are allowed to heal too." Tessa felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard shell she had built to protect herself. "I am not healing from war." "No, but you are healing from something. Can see it in the way you flinch when I move too quick, the way you watch the door like you are expecting someone to come through it with bad news." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "My mother was sick for a long time. Every day I waited to come home and find her dead. And then one day I did. I walked into our room and she was just gone, eyes open, not breathing. I had known it was coming, but I still was not ready." "You are never ready. Not really." They sat in companionable silence as the storm slowly moved east, the thunder growing more distant. Tessa felt something shift between them, some wall coming down. Preston was not just her employer or the mountain man who had given her a job. He was becoming something else, something she did not have a name for yet. The work grew easier as she learned the rhythms of the place. She began to take pride in the cabin's cleanliness, in the meals she prepared, in the efficiency with which she could now complete her tasks. Preston's quiet approval, expressed in nods and brief comments, meant more to her than elaborate praise from townfolk ever had. She also began to explore the immediate area around the cabin when her work was done. The forest was full of wonders she had never noticed during her town life. Wildflowers bloomed in hidden clearings. Birds built elaborate nests in the branches overhead. The stream was full of smooth stones and darting fish. She started bringing back flowers to put in a jar on the table, adding small touches of beauty to the cabin. Preston noticed but said nothing for several days. Then one evening he came home with a carved wooden vase, rough but serviceable. "For your flowers," he said, setting it on the table. The jar kept tipping over. Tessa turned the vase in her hands, running her fingers over the wood grain. He had made this, taken time from his busy days to carve something just for her. "It is beautiful, thank you," he shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It is just wood." But it was not just wood. It was thought and effort and a kind of caring that made her heart do strange things in her chest. 1 month came and went without either of them mentioning it. Tessa knew she should bring it up, should ask about returning to town, but she could not make herself do it. The truth was, she did not want to leave. Life in the cabin had become precious to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She was happy here, truly happy for the first time in years. The work was hard but satisfying. The isolation was peaceful rather than lonely. And Preston himself had become someone she looked forward to seeing each day. She began to notice small things about him, the way his whole face changed when he smiled, which was rare but breathtaking. The surprising neatness of his personal habits, the gentle way he spoke to the animals, the fierce intelligence in his eyes when he was working through a problem, the muscles that flexed in his forearms when he chopped wood, the sheer strength of him that should have been frightening but somehow was not. And she began to catch him watching her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. His gray eyes would follow her movements as she worked, an expression on his face she could not quite read. It made her aware of herself in new ways, of the sway of her skirts, the line of her neck, the sound of her laugh when he said something dry and unexpectedly funny. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into her stay, Tessa was working in the garden plot, trying to turn the soil for planting. Preston had mentioned wanting to put in vegetables, and she had decided to surprise him by getting the ground ready. But the earth was hard and full of rocks, and the small spade she was using was not equal to the task. She was wrestling with a particularly stubborn stone when Preston emerged from the tree line, a deer slung over his shoulders. He stopped and stared at her sweat-soaked, dirt-smudged form for a long moment. "What are you doing?" "Preparing the garden." She shoved the spade under the rock again and heaved. It did not budge. Preston lowered the deer to the ground and walked over. "That is not how you do it." "Then show me." He took the spade from her hands and demonstrated the proper technique, using leverage rather than brute force to work the stone free. Tessa watched his muscles bunch and release under his shirt, watched the focused intensity on his face. When the rock finally came free, he tossed it aside and looked at her. "You have been at this all afternoon?" "Most of it. I wanted to help." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "You help plenty. You do not need to break your back proving it. I want to contribute more than just cooking and cleaning. I want to do something that lasts." Preston was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. We will work the garden together, but we do it proper with the right tools and methods. Tomorrow morning." True to his word, Preston spent the next several days helping her prepare the entire garden plot. They worked side by side, turning soil, removing rocks, building up beds for planting. He taught her which vegetables would do well in this climate and soil, showed her how to properly space seeds, explained the importance of rotation and companion planting. Working beside him, Tessa became even more aware of his physical presence. The casual strength with which he moved heavy logs, the competence of his calloused hands, the way his hair fell forward when he bent over the rose, and how he would push it back impatiently, the deep rumble of his voice when he explained something. She found herself inventing reasons to stand close to him, to brush against his arm accidentally, to breathe in the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to him. And she began to realize with a mixture of excitement and terror that she was falling in love with Preston Northwood. It was the worst possible thing that could happen. He had given her work when she needed it, shelter when she had nowhere to go. He had been nothing but honorable in all their dealings. And here she was developing feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship, feelings that made her heart race when he walked through the door each evening, feelings that made her imagine what it would be like if he kissed her, touched her, wanted her the way she was beginning to want him. She tried to hide it, tried to push the feelings down and pretend they did not exist, but they kept growing stronger, fed by every small kindness, every shared laugh, every moment of connection. One evening, about 2 months into her stay, Preston came home later than usual. Full dark had fallen, and Tessa had been pacing the cabin, worry gnawing at her stomach. What if he had been hurt? What if he had fallen and could not get back? What if a bear or mountain lion had attacked him? When she finally heard his footsteps on the porch, relief flooded through her so intensely that she yanked the door open before he could reach for the handle. He stood there looking surprised, a bundle of furs under one arm. "I was worried," she said, the words tumbling out. "You're never this late." "Lost track of time, found a new beaver dam and had to explore it proper." He stepped inside and saw her face. "You were really worried." "Of course I was worried. You could have been hurt or killed and I would have had no way to know or help." Something shifted in his expression, becoming more intense. "You care that much?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Tessa knew this was a moment that would change things one way or another. She could deflect, make light of it, pretend her concern was merely practical. Or she could be honest. "Yes," she said simply. "I care that much." Preston set down the furs carefully, his movements deliberate. Then he took a step toward her, and another, until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. His gray eyes searched hers, asking a question she was not sure she understood. "Tessa." Her name in his deep voice sounded like a prayer. "I need to know, are you happy here?" "Very happy." "Would you want to stay, beyond the month we agreed to?" Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he must hear it. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you would consider making this permanent, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Tessa stared at him, sure she must have misheard. "Your wife?" "I know I am not much of a prospect. I live rough, far from civilization. I do not have fancy manners or sweet words, but I can provide for you, protect you, give you a home." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his hard features. "And I have come to care for you more than I thought possible. You have brought light and life to this cabin, to me. I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay here, with me, always." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "Preston, if you do not feel the same, I understand. I will take you back to town when you are ready, and we will forget I said anything. But if there is any chance you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I am asking you to consider staying, marrying me, building a life here together." The tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Preston's face fell, and he started to step back. "I am sorry. I should not have." Tessa grabbed his shirt with both hands, stopping his retreat. "You foolish man. I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm happy. Because I've been falling in love with you for weeks now and trying to hide it, because I thought you could never want someone like me." His hands came up to cup her face, his calloused thumbs wiping away her tears with surprising gentleness. "Someone like you? Tessa, you are everything I never knew I needed. You are strong and brave and kind. You adapted to this life without complaint. You make this cabin feel like a home. You make me want to be better, do better." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay. Yes to everything." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming him from merely handsome to absolutely beautiful. Then he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want to. She rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, almost tentative, as if both of them were afraid to break something precious. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft beneath his beard. Tessa melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. Preston's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made her forget how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this proper. We will go to town tomorrow, see the preacher, get married legal. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "Tomorrow?" Tessa laughed breathlessly. "That is fast. I have wasted enough time already. Do not want to waste any more." He kissed her again, harder this time, possessive. "Unless you want a longer engagement?" "No, tomorrow's perfect." They went to town the next morning, Preston setting a faster pace than the first time. They must have made quite a picture walking into Bentonville, the huge mountain man, and the woman who had left town 2 months prior with no prospects and no future. The preacher was surprised but willing to perform the ceremony, though he did insist on a day's wait to ensure Tessa was not being coerced. "I assure you, Reverend, I am marrying Mr. Northwood of my own free will," Tessa said firmly. Preston stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. The possessive protectiveness of the gesture was not lost on the preacher, but he must have seen something sincere in their faces, because he agreed to perform the ceremony the following morning. They spent that night in the boarding house, though not at Mrs. Caldwell's establishment. Preston paid for 2 rooms at the hotel, respecting propriety, even though Tessa could see the hunger in his eyes when he bid her good night at her door. "One more night," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "Then you are mine in every way." The promise in those words made heat flood through her body. She went to bed alone but could not sleep, thinking about what the next day would bring. The wedding was simple, performed in the small church with Mr. Henderson and his wife as witnesses. Tessa wore the best of her 3 dresses, wishing she had something nicer for such an important occasion. But when Preston saw her, the look in his eyes said she might as well have been wearing silk and diamonds. "You are beautiful," he said, and she believed him. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged simple gold bands that Preston had purchased from Henderson's store that morning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Preston he could kiss his bride, he did so with a thoroughness that made Mrs. Henderson fan herself and Mr. Henderson cough awkwardly. "Let us go home," Preston said against her lips, and Tessa thrilled at the word. Home. Not his cabin, but their home. Their life together. They made the walk back to the valley in record time, both of them eager to begin their married life. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Preston swept Tessa into his arms, carrying her inside despite her laughing protests. "Preston, put me down!" "Not a chance, Mrs. Northwood. I am carrying my wife over the threshold proper." Mrs. Northwood, she was married. She had a husband, a home, a future. All the things the townspeople had said she would never have. Tessa wrapped her arms around Preston's neck and kissed him with all the love and passion she'd been holding back. He carried her to the bed he had moved down from the loft while they were in town, the blanket curtain now gone since they no longer needed the pretense of separation. He laid her down gently on the quilts and looked at her with such intensity that it stole her breath. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "About me? About this life?" "More sure than I have ever been about anything." That was all the encouragement he needed. Preston joined her on the bed, and they spent their wedding night learning each other's bodies with wonder and passion, confirming with touch and sighs what they had already declared with words. Life settled into a new pattern after that, one built on love and partnership rather than employer and employee. They worked together in the garden, tended the traps together, did everything side by side. Preston taught Tessa to shoot, to track, to read the forest signs. Tessa taught Preston that his cabin could be more than just functional, showing him how small touches of beauty and comfort could transform a space. As summer deepened into fall, their love grew deeper too. Tessa had never known marriage could be like this, full of laughter and passion and companionship. Preston was a demanding but generous lover, and she discovered pleasures she had never imagined existed. But beyond the physical, there was a profound emotional connection that made every day feel like a gift. One October morning, Tessa woke feeling queasy and stumbled outside just in time to lose her breakfast behind the cabin. Preston found her there, his face creased with concern. "Are you sick? Should I ride for the doctor?" Tessa wiped her mouth and started to laugh, the realization hitting her all at once. "No, I'm not sick. I'm pregnant." Preston froze, his eyes going wide. "Pregnant? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor. I have missed my monthly courses. I'm sick in the mornings and my breasts are tender. All the signs my mother described when she talked about carrying me." He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands coming to rest on her still flat stomach with reverence. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" He looked up at her with tears glistening in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a real family. You have given me everything, Tessa." She tangled her fingers in his long hair, overcome with emotion. "We have given each other everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the isolation concerned Preston. He wanted Tessa to have help when the baby came, did not trust himself to handle childbirth alone. They made the difficult decision that Tessa would go to town when her time was near, stay with Mrs. Henderson, who had experience with birthing, and Preston would be there with her. The months passed quickly. Preston doted on Tessa, insisting she rest more, eat more, do less heavy work. She protested but secretly loved his protectiveness. Her body changed and swelled, and she watched Preston's face fill with wonder each time he felt the baby kick. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and not letting up. Tessa's belly grew huge, making movement difficult. She nested like a bird, organizing and reorganizing the cabin, sewing tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, preparing everything for the baby's arrival. In late February, as the snow was just beginning to melt, Tessa's pains began. Preston nearly panicked, something she had never seen from her usually calm husband. He bundled her onto the horse he had purchased specifically for this purpose, and they rode for town, Preston holding her carefully the entire way. Mrs. Henderson took charge immediately, settling Tessa in a bedroom and shooing Preston out to wait with her husband. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Preston wore a path in the Hendersons' floor with his pacing, starting at every cry from upstairs. Finally, as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry split the air. Preston took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the room despite Mrs. Henderson's protests. Tessa lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair sweat-soaked and her face pale. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. "Preston, come meet your son." Son. He had a son. Preston approached slowly, afraid his huge hands might break something so small and fragile. But Tessa placed the baby in his arms with complete confidence, and he looked down into the red, wrinkled face of his child. "He has your eyes," Tessa said softly, "gray like storm clouds. He is perfect." Preston's voice was thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas Samuel Northwood, after Tessa's father and Preston's mentor. They stayed in town for 2 weeks while Tessa recovered her strength, then returned to their cabin with their son bundled against the lingering cold. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a powerful set of lungs when he was displeased. Preston was surprisingly adept with him, those huge scarred hands gentle as butterfly wings when changing nappies or rocking his son to sleep. As spring arrived and Thomas grew from newborn to infant, Tessa would often find Preston sitting on the porch at dawn, the baby against his chest, talking to him in low tones about the forest and the mountains and the life they would share. The sight never failed to make her heart clench with love. One evening as they sat together after putting Thomas to bed, Preston pulled Tessa onto his lap and held her close. "Do you remember what those people in town said? That you had no prospects and no future?" "I remember. They were wrong, so completely wrong." He kissed her temple. "You have prospects beyond measure. You're an amazing mother, a skilled homesteader, my partner in everything. And your future, He turned her to face him. Your future is right here, with me and Thomas and whatever other children we are blessed with. Your future is a life filled with love and purpose and joy. Tears pricked Tessa's eyes. They said the same things about you once, didn't they? That the war had broken you, that you were wasting your life hiding in the mountains. Probably. I stopped listening to what people said a long time ago. Well, they were wrong about you too. You are the strongest, kindest, most capable man I've ever known. You built this life with your own hands, and then you shared it with me. You gave me everything when I had nothing. We gave each other everything, Preston corrected, echoing her words from months before. I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to live again. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell outside, listening to their son's soft breathing from his cradle nearby. Tessa thought about the girl she had been a year ago, desperate and alone, walking through town with no idea where her next meal would come from. She thought about the mountain man who had offered her an impossible choice that turned out to be the best decision of her life. Time passed in the sweet rhythms of mountain life. Thomas grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk by pulling himself up on his father's legs, learning to talk with words like Papa and Mama and Tree. Tessa got pregnant again, and this time the birth was easier, producing a daughter they named Carolyn Grace. 2 years later came another son, William, and 2 years after that, twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family. Preston built an addition that doubled the living space, adding real bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The garden grew bigger each year, producing vegetables and herbs that Tessa preserved for winter. Preston's trapping brought in good money, enough that they never wanted for necessities and could occasionally afford small luxuries. The children grew strong and wild, learning the ways of the forest from their father and the practical skills of homesteading from their mother. Thomas showed his father's aptitude for tracking and hunting. Caroline had her mother's gift for growing things. William was fearless, always climbing higher trees and crossing deeper streams. The twins were inseparable, speaking their own language and getting into mischief together. Through it all, Preston and Tessa's love continued to deepen. They still found time for each other, despite the demands of 5 children, stealing moments alone when they could. Preston would pull Tessa behind the cabin for passionate kisses while the children napped. Tessa would join Preston in the loft after the children were asleep, and they would love each other with the practiced ease of long partnership. They went to town perhaps twice a year, always an adventure with all the children in tow. The townspeople watched them pass with various expressions. Some looked on with envy at the obvious happiness and love in their family. Others shook their heads, unable to understand why anyone would choose such an isolated life. Mrs. Caldwell, still running her boarding house, always had something snide to say. 5 children, she said once, loud enough for Tessa to hear. Living like savages in the woods. What kind of life is that? Preston had started to respond, but Tessa laid a hand on his arm, stopping him. She looked at Mrs. Caldwell with complete serenity. It is the kind of life where my children know they are loved every single day, where they sleep safe and warm, with full bellies and parents who are devoted to each other and to them, where they learn to be strong and self-sufficient and kind. I would not trade it for anything. Mrs. Caldwell had no response to that, and Tessa had walked away with her head high, Preston's proud smile warming her back. The years accumulated like fallen leaves. The children grew and changed, becoming their own people. Thomas at 16 was nearly as tall as his father, with the same broad shoulders and quiet competence. Caroline at 14 was beautiful and skilled with healing herbs. William at 12 could outclaim any tree in the forest. The twins at 10 were a force of nature, fearless and clever. Preston's hair gained threads of silver and lines deepened around his eyes, but he was still strong and capable. Tessa had a few silver strands of her own, and her body bore the marks of bearing 5 children, but Preston told her often that she grew more beautiful with each passing year. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, their children's laughter drifting from inside the cabin, Preston took Tessa's hand. Do you ever regret it? The choice you made? You could have stayed in town, found some other way. Tessa looked at him, at the man who had saved her when she had nothing, who had loved her when she felt unlovable, who had built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. not for a single moment. This is where I was always meant to be. With you, with our children, in these mountains. This is home." Preston raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Tessa Northwood." "I love you too, Preston Northwood. Always and forever." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside the cabin, one of the twins shrieked with laughter, and Thomas's deeper voice rumbled in response. Carolyn started singing, her voice sweet and clear. William was probably getting into something he should not, but that was nothing new. This was Tessa's life, not the life anyone in town had predicted for her, not the life she had imagined for herself in her darkest moments. But it was hers, built moment by moment, choice by choice, day by day, built on love and trust and the chance a mountain man had taken on a desperate woman with nothing to her name. The townspeople had been so completely wrong. She had prospects beyond measure and a future brighter than sunrise over the mountains. She had a husband who loved her fiercely, children who made every day an adventure, and a home that was filled with joy and purpose. As darkness fell complete and the first stars appeared overhead, Preston stood and offered her his hand. Tessa took it, letting him pull her to her feet and into his arms. They stood together on the porch of the cabin he had built, surrounded by the forest and the mountains and the life they had created together. "Come to bed, wife," Preston murmured against her hair. "In a moment, husband. I want to stay here just a little longer." So they stood together under the stars, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. The mountain wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. The stream sang its eternal song over the rocks. And in the cabin behind them, their children settled into sleep, safe and loved and completely unaware of how remarkable their existence was. They did not know that their mother had once been declared worthless by small-minded people. They did not know that their father had once been a broken man hiding from the world. All they knew was that they were loved, that they belonged, that this mountain valley was their home and always would be. Years later, when the children were grown with families of their own, they would tell their own children about the day a desperate woman met a mountain man and how that meeting changed everything. They would speak of love and courage and the way two people could build a whole world together from nothing but determination and devotion. But that was still to come. For now, on this perfect evening in the mountains of Arkansas, Tessa and Preston stood together in the darkness, complete and content. They had built something that would outlast them, something that would echo down through generations, not just children, though those were precious, but a legacy of love, of choosing each other every single day, of proving that the people who said they had no prospects and no future were completely and utterly wrong. They had prospects beyond measure, beyond. They had a future that stretched bright and hopeful into infinity. They had each other, and in the end, that was everything that mattered. Preston turned Tessa in his arms and kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Ready for bed now?" he asked. "Ready for bed now." They went inside together, closing the door on the night. The cabin glowed warm with lamplight for a little while longer. Then darkness fell complete as the last lamp was extinguished. The forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. The stream continued its endless song. The mountains stood eternal watch over the little cabin in the valley. And inside, two people who had found each other against all odds lay down to sleep in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together. A life that had started with nothing and become everything. A life that proved love could conquer circumstance, that courage could open doors that fear kept locked, that two damaged souls could heal each other and build something beautiful in the process. The townspeople had declared Tessa Whitmore had no prospects and no future, but Preston Northwood had given her both, and so much more besides. He had given her love and safety and purpose. He had given her children and a home. He had given her a life worth living, rich with meaning and joy. And she had given him the same in return, because that was what love did. It multiplied rather than divided. It created rather than destroyed. It built bridges across chasms that seemed impossible to cross. As they drifted into sleep, Preston's arms tight around her, Tessa's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude, not just for what she had, though that was immeasurable, but for what she had escaped, for the courage to accept an impossible offer from a stranger, for the willingness to walk into the unknown rather than accept the slow death of spirit that town life had offered. She had taken a leap of faith into darkness, and Preston had been there to catch her. Together, they had built a light that would shine for generations. That was their legacy. That was their story. And it was far from over. The years continued to pass with the same sweet rhythm. The children grew up and married, some staying close to the mountains, others venturing further afield. But they all came home regularly, bringing grandchildren who filled the expanded cabin with noise and laughter. Preston and Tessa grew old together gracefully, their love never dimming, but rather deepening with each passing year. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, had lived a life full to bursting with meaning and connection. On their 40th wedding anniversary, all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a massive celebration. Thomas, now a mountain man in his own right with a wife and 5 children, stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd, "who taught us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every single day. Who showed us that the best life is one built with your own hands alongside someone you trust completely. Who proved that what other people think does not matter nearly as much as what you know to be true in your own heart." Everyone raised their glasses, and Preston looked at Tessa with tears in his eyes. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 4 decades of practice. "We did all right," he said softly. "We did better than all right," Tessa corrected. "We did extraordinary." And they had. Against all odds, despite impossible circumstances, in defiance of everyone who said it could not be done, they had built an extraordinary life together. A life that started with a desperate woman, a compassionate mountain man, and a single decision to take a chance on each other. That decision had changed everything. It had created not just a marriage, but a dynasty. Not just a home, but a sanctuary. Not just survival, but a thriving, vibrant life full of love and purpose and joy. As the celebration continued around them, children and grandchildren laughing and talking and enjoying each other's company, Preston pulled Tessa close and kissed her temple. Thank you," he said. "For everything." "Thank you," she replied. "For giving me a life when I had nothing, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this with me." "Always," Preston promised, "for always." And it was a promise he kept, right up until his last breath many years later, surrounded by the family he and Tessa had created. She followed him not long after, unable to imagine life without her other half, her partner, her great love. But their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In the stories told around fires about the day, a mountain man offered a desperate woman a job that turned into a lifetime. In the values passed down through generations about love and courage and choosing your own path regardless of what others say. The cabin still stands in that hidden valley in the Ozark Mountains, maintained now by Thomas's children. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the trees and the stream sings over the rocks, people swear they can feel the presence of the 2 souls who built it all. Preston and Tessa, still together, still watching over the life they created. Because some love stories do not end, they just transform, becoming something bigger than the 2 people who started them. They become legend and legacy, inspiration and example. They become proof that the human heart is capable of extraordinary things when given the chance to bloom. Tessa Whitmore had no prospects and no future, they said. But Preston Northwood gave her both, and so much more besides. He gave her love that lasted a lifetime. He gave her a family that would echo through generations. He gave her a home that became holy ground. He gave her a story worth telling over and over as proof that miracles happen when 2 damaged souls reach out and hold on tight, and she gave him exactly the same in return. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is the truth that cannot be denied. Love, real love, changes everything. It turns nothing into everything, despair into hope, endings into beginnings. It creates futures where none seemed possible and opens doors that appeared permanently locked. Preston and Tessa Northwood proved it. They lived it. They were it. And their story, born from impossible circumstances and forged in the fires of genuine devotion, will live on as long as there are hearts willing to believe that love can conquer all. Because in the end, it did. It really, truly did. The mountain wind continues to blow through that hidden valley in Arkansas. The stream continues its eternal song. The cabin continues to stand, solid and enduring, a monument to what two people can build when they choose each other over and over again. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Preston and Tessa Northwood are still together, still in love, still proving that the best stories are the ones where broken people find each other and become whole, where desperate circumstances lead to extraordinary joy, where endings transform into beginnings that last forever. They said she had no prospects and no future. They were wrong. So completely, utterly, magnificently wrong. She had everything because she had love. And in the end, that made all the difference in the world.